This is The Meaningful Way. I'm your host, Luke Iorio. So for all the listeners out there, I've got a question for you. How far will you go to change your stars, to chase down a dream? Will you go 1,000 miles? 3,000 miles? Will you go homeless? Will you go homeless twice? And will you keep going, even if that's the case? Well, today, you're going to get to hear that story. We are very lucky to have Damien Horne here. Damien Horne is from Hickory, North Carolina. He's one of 12 children. That's right, 12 children from a blended family. Middle child, adores his mother, is the first in his family to earn a high school diploma, and now devotes a lot of his time and resources trying to make a better life for his loved one and those around him. Damien's mother had a love of God that inspired him to develop a personal relationship himself with God and Christ at the age of 7. The loss of brothers, experiencing family members being incarcerated, and figuring out how to make ends meet led Damien to want more for himself. As a young adult, he first moved to LA on $400. That's right, $400. We're going to ask him about that. And then after being homeless for a couple of years, he found his way back to North Carolina, saved up some more to move to Nashville. What happens? He goes homeless again. We're going to hear about that too, because it was during that period of time and what was going on at that point in his life that his fortunes dramatically changed in just a moment. And we'll chat a little bit about that story and how that enabled him to just excel as a musician, a public speaker, and as a world changer. At this point, Damien's credentials are loaded. He's shared the stage with the likes of everyone from Faith Hill and Big and Rich to Robert Randolph and John Legend. He's landed publishing deals with Big Love and Warner Chappell. He's also part of a country music trio, The Farm, that was signed to Warner Brothers. During their stint, they had 2 charting singles, Home Sweet Home and Be Grateful. When Damien's not on the road as an artist, he's working alongside the Salvation Army and Boys and Girls Clubs to share his story as being one of 12 children and being that first to graduate high school, as well as avoiding being a victim of the streets. And his latest project is Motivate.com, an online platform that showcases people who are doing their part to make the world a better place. I have a feeling you can tell why we've got him on this show. Each week, there are new videos and articles on the platform he's committed to, bringing awareness to homelessness, human trafficking, prison ministry, world outreach, youth, adoption, and the word. That said, it should come as no surprise that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, and Mother Teresa are just some of his purpose, mentors, and life heroes. With that, Damien, thank you so much for coming on The Meaningful Way.
Man, thank you so much for the opportunity, man. That intro makes me sound super interesting, man. I appreciate that, man. I just, man, like I said, it's a pleasure to be on the show, just to be able to, to share what's been given to me.
I appreciate it. Well, it is part of that interesting story that you do have. I think the natural place to begin is $400 to move to LA. What were you thinking?
I think that's the problem. I don't think I was thinking very much. Like I was born and raised in Hickory, North Carolina, which is a pretty small little town, and it's really all I ever knew. It was a combination of that youthful like ignorance and that that mindset of being able to take on the world, and then just ignorance, not knowing what was in store for me outside of the small town of Hickory, North Carolina.
Yeah. So just to truly to set the stage, I do want to ask a little bit about that background and that journey, but just for everybody to really understand where you are at today, let's start with this. What is it that you believe is your purpose in this life?
My purpose is to encourage, inspire, and motivate others toward their purpose. The second biggest discovery in my life was discovering what my purpose was, and it gave meaning for waking up every day. It was the why for getting up every day, and I know how that for me changed the whole trajectory of my life. And I feel like there's something in me that is a calling now to help other people discover what their purpose is and why they're here and what they're doing. And that's what's becoming super important to me.
So then tell us a little bit about that, the experiences, the circumstances of growing up and what you went through that led you to find and to see and have that type of purpose in life.
Well, I mean, like I said, it started in North Carolina, and I raised in a huge, blended family of 12 kids. I was raised by a single mother. My father was a struggling alcoholic and was, never really around. And so at an early age, all I was kind of seeing was, like just kind of dysfunction and death and destruction. That was kind of all around me. That was the environment I grew up in. Like you said, I lost two of my older brothers who died, and two of my younger brothers incarcerated at young ages. So this is kind of what I was seeing day in and day out. So I felt like that was kind of the options I had for myself in life. But at a young age, my mom was very, instrumental in introducing me to my faith in God and belief in God. And so those words from Scripture started, planting seed in my heart and my mind, and took root. And I started to really trust in that and believe in that, even when things didn't necessarily look like, what maybe I was reading in Scripture where it talks about, plans to prosper me and give me hope in the future. And somehow they rang true to me, and I just held to that, in times that didn't seem to be the brightest.
Yeah. It's amazing, and it sounds like it's part of that work that you do even today with, as I was saying, the Salvation Army and Boys and Girls Club, is really sharing how is it that seed gets planted so that so many can turn away from being victims of the street, as you say, and it's something that you so clearly have demonstrated and turned from with everything you experienced. I guess maybe the kind of leading up, I mentioned this in the intro and kind of tease it out, is that you go to LA, you're homeless. You find a way to get back to North Carolina. You go back now to Nashville to try it all over again. You're homeless again. And then someone drops some big change, as it were, in your guitar case. And I guess maybe big change is an interesting way of putting it, right? So if you could tell everybody a bit about that moment, the man that you described with the black cowboy hat and handlebar mustache.
Yeah. I was, if you ever make your way to Nashville, Tennessee, anybody's ever been there, you notice on 2nd Avenue and Broadway, there's people busking, what we call busking, where you sit on the side of the road and you kind of play music and people walk by and throw money into a good guitar case or whatever the case might be. And I was doing that, when I first got there, I saw that happening. I was like, all right, this is like my first gig. So I would sit out on the street for hours and play. And then one particular night, this guy, like you said, walks by with a big old black cowboy hat and a handlebar mustache. And he kind of slows up and he's listening, and he reaches into his wallet and he pulls out $100 bill and throws it into my guitar case. And so that definitely caught my attention. So, I played a little more, and he stopped and started asking me questions, and we ended up jamming for a little bit. And I didn't know who it was at the time, but I later found out it was John Rich from a country duo called Big and Rich. And he encouraged me that day, with the money, and then also just kind of talked to me. He's like, man, you really have gifts, you have a talent. I have this thing that we do every week called the Music Mafia. I want you to come out and hang. You don't have to sit on the street corner. People would listen to you, And so I hooked up with him and met his partner in crime, Big Kenny, and Gretchen Wilson, the Redneck Woman, James Otto. The list goes on and all these different artists who were kind of playing in this one particular club called the Pub of Love at the time, and just was like playing music and just had this kind of revolution starting in Nashville, and I became a part of that, and it took off. It literally took off, and a lot of people's careers took off from that. And Big and Rich ended up getting signed. Gretchen had a huge, single and got signed, and a lot of artists' careers took off from that. And I look at it as just that divine encounter.
Absolutely. Let me ask. So then you've got this divine encounter, this extraordinary circumstance that unfolds for you, and what are you starting to think? I mean, you're on this wild ride, all these things are coming together, and you've had the experiences of being homeless and going through some of the challenges and experiences you've had in your life. What's really kind of going through your mind when all of that starts to unfold?
Well, it's a combination of things, from being, my internal self, growing up in the situation I was in. I was so used to things taking a quick turn for the worse. So when things like that tend to happen, especially during that time in my life, I would be excited, but I would try to keep my composure, because you almost couldn't get too excited, because it's almost like it's too good to be true. Things like that happening, especially when you've seen so much and you think you're getting by, and the next minute you're like knocked flat back on your back again.
Sure.
And so it just kind of took me a moment to adjust to that. But one thing I've learned is it is just that, and I tend to be a little more positive than negative. I'm a little more of an optimist. So I tend to look at situations like, when you're down and out and you're going through things, like at any moment, any second, any event, things can turn around. That's for the good and for the bad. So everything comes in season. So, I might be down now, but I won't always be down if I continue to fight. And I truly believe that, things will always end work to the good for me. You know what I'm saying? And so And if it's not good right now, then it's not the end. You know, in the end, it'll be good. So.
I like that. So then, you know, what were some of the things that you did to kind of not only maintain that positive outlook, but keep yourself grounded and centered while, you know, life is just taking off in every direction?
Well, you know, one of the main things is just not forgetting, you know, how I got to this point. You know what I'm saying? You know, it's crazy how, like, we are born into this world, like, you know, the most dependent creatures. You know, we can't do anything without the help of somebody else. But then we're kind of raised to believe that, you know, we have to be independent of everybody. We go out and do everything alone. But, like, I never believed that to be the case. I've always known it, you know, it took heroes along the way for me to really, like, keep me guided and in the right path. Like, literally, like moments like that John Rich story has happened to me throughout my whole life. And maybe not as big as that one might have been, but just, you know, in a moment's time where, like, I was headed in the wrong path and the right person came along and said the right thing that kind of redirected me. So just keeping that in mind. And then also, you know, going back to the, you know, the things that got me to where I was, you know, like the Boys and Girls Club, you know, was instrumental in getting me off of the streets during the times where I was seeing a lot of that crazy stuff. The Salvation Army was huge in helping me develop my faith and growing up. And even to the point where, like, you know, putting food on my table as a kid and clothes and toys for Christmas and stuff like that. So being able to give back in that way definitely keeps me grounded.
That's excellent. So as you know, your career develops, let's kind of shift back to this idea of purpose that is so front and center for, you know, kind of who you are and what you're doing right now. How is it that, you know, the gifts that you have, and obviously specifically this incredible gift that you have for music, how is it that those gifts factor into the purpose that you've got in life?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I remember thinking when I first started doing music, and I, like, my idea when I was 17 and I graduated and moved to Hollywood was to be rich and famous. That literally was the plan. It was just like, all right, I'm going to Hollywood with $400 to be rich and famous, and because I felt like, you know, oh, this is my purpose. Music is my purpose. But, you know, a little bit of age and time and just, you know, a little revelation let me know that, you know, like, music is my gift. It's my tool to use within my purpose. My purpose was much bigger than just playing music, you know, because I started seeing the effect that, I knew the effect that music had on me personally, you know, like just being able to write and get things off of my chest, you know, as therapy, and how, like, when I would sing, how it changes somebody else's mood. Somebody would listen to a song like, man, I've been going through that. I've been dealing with that. Or, man, this song really, you know, spoke to me in this way. So I was like, no, it's bigger than just the music. Like, it's really affecting the lives of people. So ultimately, it's just to say that I discovered that music was a gift that was just my tool within my purpose. So I incorporate that in what I do, encouraging and inspiring and motivating people. And that's just one of my tools, you know, and that's something I had to, you know, get the understanding of that.
I love that, because I think there's a lot of individuals that will occasionally confuse that tool, that strength, for what their purpose actually is. And that the purpose is something, there's something bigger there. There's some other big change or contribution or meaning that's actually behind it. And when they begin to recognize it's the talents and the gifts that they do have are what enable that, it creates a very different combination, a much more powerful one. That's great. So tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing now. You've started this platform around encourage, inspire, and motivate. And, you know, I'm curious from your perspective, what is it you're really trying to do to get out there? Because there's not a whole lot of artists that are out there that are taking the time to put things out the way that it seems like you are headed towards right now.
Yeah, I just, you know, for me, artistry has always been a place of freedom, a platform of freedom for people to express things that they feel and what they're going through and those kinds of things. And I just look out in the world, and it feels a little one-sided to me, you know, and that's just the way I felt about it. So it's just like, well, you know, maybe my job is to bring some balance to that, you know, and I just kind of look at the news and I listen to music, and I just hear a lot of things that I feel like are on one side. That tend to be negative in my opinion. So, you know, like I want to highlight some positive things going on in the world and just kind of bring a little more balance to that, you know, and that's what Encourage, Inspire, Motivate is about. You know, it's just a landing page that highlights what other people are doing that is great, and that's, you know, making a difference. And a lot of times you don't see that, you know, because I know a lot of times the negative news and things like that tend to get more attention or sell, you know, so to speak. So it's just like, it's just my my humble, attempt to try to bring some balance to that.
Well, I appreciate you using your platform and your microphone, your megaphone for that purpose. And I see, that seems to be something that's coming up more and more often with some of the guests and experts and everything else that I have on The Meaningful Way, is helping people remember, what are the things that are going really, really well? What are the ways people are contributing? What are the things that we have in common as opposed to the things that make us different? And it sounds like that's really part and parcel to what part of the message that you're trying to get out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to go back, because I'll admit to you, I'll admit to everybody, I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to your music today to get ready to have this chance to interview you. And I've enjoyed a lot of the songs that I've had the opportunity to listen to. There were two in particular, though, that I've got to say that stood out. And I was curious about a little bit of background here, because I think they're so relevant to today's times. And the one being Barbarians, which for everybody, it was released, about 24 months ago, as it were, in 2015. And the other then being Shine, and obviously what then has become of what you're now doing with Shine. And I guess maybe if we start with Barbarians, I'm just kind of curious a little bit of maybe the meaning and the purpose, behind that song, and what you see as, how that factors into what we've, what we're seeing in the world in the last several years.
Yeah, honestly, I mean that I started writing that song a long time ago. Kind of during the time where you remember the Sandy Hook shooting at the school, and I kind of started it then, and then literally after that, you just kind of heard about that, more and more often, just happening, and then it just kept that kind of thought kept coming back to me. I was like, man, it's like the world is becoming so barbaric. It's like we're moving backwards as opposed to forward. And that thought just kind of ran across my mind, and so I just wrote that down. But then it goes from a broad scale like that, but then it also goes down to an individual basis, just how we speak to each other every day. I grew up in the country in Hickory, North Carolina. I remember growing up, even though I grew up in some tough times. I remember growing up around people where you would literally speak to everybody every time you see them. You would say hey. You would you be respectful of your elders, just some good old fashioned, just morals in that sense. And I feel like we're just getting further and further away from that. And it was just kind of scary to me. And I feel like as opposed to in our minds, sometimes we might feel like as a society that we're progressing, but when I look at it, sometimes it feels like we're digressing, becoming more barbaric as opposed to civilized. Yeah. So that's kind of where that song came about, how it came about.
Well, I appreciate it, because it's one of the things I enjoy so much about art and music is the reflection, the mirror that it provides us. And sometimes it's a window into your world, and so often it's the mirror up to the world as to what's going on. And I guess the reason why that stood out then is because of the other piece of not only the song, but what you're up to right now, which is around the work with Shine. And so maybe if you could share a little bit of background on the actual song itself, and then obviously I want everybody to hear about what you're up to right now with this one-man show.
Yeah, Shine has become like a mantra for me. I know ultimately I was just always afraid as a young person to kind of do anything really. I didn't really believe there was a lot for me to do just because of, my environment. And then once I got outside of that, I almost was kind of afraid, thought maybe I was kidding myself to think that I could achieve and do more. And it kind of was spawned from, there's a Marianne Williamson quote that Nelson Mandela used in a speech, and it's been in a few movies. But basically, the paraphrase is saying our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate, but that we're powerful. And we have this power and this light inside of us. And sometimes we're afraid to step out and shine and to use that. But so this song kind of talks about encouraging people to do that. We all have this power, we all have this light and this ability to shine, and whatever it may be that's holding you back from doing that, fight past that and shine. And when you shine, the cool thing about that is that you liberate other people to do the same thing. That's kind of the whole point of me always telling my story and where I came from, because people can hear that and then they're gonna be like, well, if this guy can do this, I can surely do this, and so hopefully it inspires somebody else to shine. And I consider shining as when you discover your purpose and the giver of purpose, and then you live that out. You're shining.
Excellent. So what was the impetus to turn it into a one-man show, and where are you taking that now? How's that going?
It's going great. I've already done a few shows, and I've got a few more booked for this year. And my goal is just to kind of to do my life story in a one-man show, kind of like in a theatrical sense, where people can come and be entertained, but at the same time catch the message of Shine, kind of capture what that song is about, but through my life story and the totality of what the arts can do, you know. And I just always feel like it's always a cool plate to deliver the, you know, food on, of like what you want to get across to people is through the arts, you know. And it's like, and like I said, that mantra Shine is kind of what I'm all about. It really taps into my purpose and what I'm about. And so in doing that in a theatrical sense, you know, just makes it it's just a cool delivery system, I feel like, for that.
Yeah, you know, I've seen it seems like a rise, maybe a little bit more popularity with the one-man shows coming back around because of exactly what you're sharing. It's a very intimate art and a just extraordinary way to connect your story to an audience.
Right.
So, let's go a little bit further on this idea of shining. What you said before is, you know, what shining is to you is it's that finding that purpose and then how you live it out. And I guess I'm curious how, you know, in your experience and what you've seen and maybe some advice that you have in terms of how is it that people can go about finding that purpose, and then what does it look like? What does it mean to actually step into it and actually live it out?
Right. Well, I mean, I know, you know, because we're all so different, we have so many, you know, we're made up so differently, you know what I'm saying, and have different unique talents and gifts. You know, for me, the process was, first of all, like, if I believe that, first of all, I have a purpose in life and there's more to me than just, you know, this, kind of passing of you know, time or the wind, then if I believe I have purpose, then I have to understand, like, okay, well, what gives me purpose, and what, you know, and if I feel like there's a design to me, then who is the designer? So for me, the first step to that was discovering who the grand designer was, who the giver of purpose is, where does purpose come from? And I look at that from the sense of God, you know, like I feel like I was created by God, and he's the grand designer, and who knows better what the design is for than the designer. So it's, first of all, for me, was tapping into who God was, understanding God and what he designed me for, and then secondly, just stepping into the natural gifts that I have and understanding those things. And also, you know, like things that, you know, like I said, I'm naturally an optimistic person. You know, I have a gift in music, you know, and there's a few other things that kind of tie into that, you know, that which it's almost kind of like looking at a bird and it's like, oh, well, why do I have these feathers? Well, it makes it easy for flight. You know what I'm saying? Like, it'd be different if they were in the water, you know? And so almost that kind of sense, okay, looking at my makeup and the kind of person that I am, the gifts and tools I have, and assessing that, it's like, man, you know, what can I do with these tools and the gifts that I have that would make the most impact on the world? And I feel like that's a great way process to find out what your purpose is.
That's excellent. You know, for everybody just kind of breaking that down, because I think that's a cool little, almost like a mini process you described, is, you know, first beginning with understanding, you know, what I would just term as your kind of your spiritual philosophy, meaning, you know, what is that grand design to you? Where does that purpose come from? And figuring that out for yourself. Then line it up with what are those natural gifts, those natural talents that you have, and considering which are the ones that have the greatest impact towards both your own feeling of making a difference in what you enjoy, but also the impact that it has on others. And then Absolutely. Third, I mean, you know, you keep going back to this positive mindset, and I think it is the mindset is so critical to to ultimately how all of this comes together. So I guess then the next step of it is, I know people that'll do this work and they'll focus here, and maybe they'll have a little bit of trouble with clarity, but they'll get there. And yet, getting there, seeing it, and then living it, two completely different things. And so I'm curious where your perspective on what does it mean to live it? What does that look like? How do we do that?
Absolutely. You know, that's a good point. You know, and I remember thinking this thought, and I've had friends who think this thought is just like you know, people who do have that mindset and get to that point, you always imagine yourself like, I want to change the world. Like, in my mind, I was like, I want to be remembered like a Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King. You know, like I want to make that type of impact. You know, where people are talking about me from long after I'm gone. But in order to get to that process, you know, like, you have to start where you are. And I think sometimes people get so overwhelmed with, you know, how far they want to go with it. It's hard to kind of do the initial first steps. You know, you kind of have to be a good steward of where you're at initially and build and grow from there and allow it to be, you know, what it will be. You know, it's kind of hard to say, man, I want to bench press 300 pounds, but Right. And then go in the first day at the gym and just try to do that, since that's a lot to take on, as opposed to just gradually building. You get stronger, opportunities grow, and your platform broadens. And then, you put in the work and you wake up one day and you're like, wow, okay. It was kind of the feeling I get as you were reading my bio at the beginning of the segment. I kind of feel the same way. I was like, man, when you say it like that, I'm like, oh yeah. And it's just but sometimes you put in the work so much, you just kind of have your head down and keep going.
But except that's part of what makes it happen, and I think that's really the cool perspective of what you're sharing is that when we start to line up the purpose, and even when I've talked about the meaningful way, and I've gone on my own journey of discovering what is this meaningful way for me. And originally, when you start to dream and you start to picture and you start to create this big vision, it can be pretty daunting. How am I going to get right? How big is this? Where am I going to go with this? But to your point of recognize, start from where you are. And what is that, what's the 1% you can focus on? What's the one thing you can look at right now? What's the, the next 3 steps? Don't worry about the next 200 steps, right?
Right.
And I love you highlighting that. So I guess, Damien, then at this point in your journey, your life, your career, I guess to me, it's, what is it that makes your life, your work meaningful to you?
Well, what makes my work meaningful to me is first and foremost is God. My faith in God is always like giving me purpose and hope. And then second of all is people. I feel like God has given me a purpose and a gift to use for other people. So as long as there are people who need to be encouraged and are looking for direction and help, and I feel like I have the ability to give that and share that, then I have purpose, and my family and friends and beyond that circle. So those are the things, that give me purpose. That's my why for getting up every day. I feel like, that will always be the case until I'm gone.
And just some great perspective that's out there in this conversation I've gotten into a lot, which is whatever your spiritual beliefs happen to be, and the range and the whole spectrum of what's there. The one thing we can't deny is that one way or the other, we have been born with certain innate gifts. We have certain innate abilities. Every single one of us uniquely does. And the question you're laying out there is really, what are you going to create with that? What's the difference you're going to make? How are you going to step into that? How are you going to live into that and fulfill a purpose? And when you connect that purpose to something even bigger, that's consistently highlighted as something that drives, positivity in life and happiness and meaning and all the wonderful experience that we really truly want to live and have in this world. Damien, I want to thank you for coming on The Meaningful Way and sharing a bit about your journey, your story, and really just all the wonderful things and wonderful work and wonderful messages that you have that you're sharing out there.
Man, thank you again. Like I said, thank you again for the opportunity. By you, allow me to be on this platform. It allows me to continue to do what I do, so I definitely appreciate it.
Damien, I appreciate it. And for everybody, it's when I brought up the song of Damien's and the work he's doing around this message of shine, I had a feeling where that was going to be connected to. And so today I actually want to close with paraphrasing some of those words that Damien was bringing up from Marianne Williamson and her epic work, A Return to Love. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. It is our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And I hope you will incorporate that into what is your own meaningful way and the way it is that you begin to let it shine and get out there. So as always, until the next time, continue to enjoy the journey. Thanks for tuning in to The Meaningful Way. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor and please subscribe and follow along with all these great guests, their stories, and interviews. Also, it helps us a lot if you not only share some of your favorite episodes online, but also provide us feedback. Go into iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever your favorite podcast app happens to be, and rate the show. Provide us some feedback and let us know how it is that we're doing. If you want to learn more about what we're up to, whether it be with the IPEC Coach Training School, the Live, Lead, Play Network, or even just what's evolving with The Meaningful Way, go on and head on over to LukeIorio.com.